Hola, amigas y amigos. Welcome to the MíraLA Podcast. I'm your host, Arianna Lemus. This podcast is by women, for women, and anyone willing to listen to women. Enjoy the show. Isabel Grace is a woman-owned florist business. Aside from making beautiful bouquets for every occasion, she and her team plan events to help you celebrate all of your family celebrations and milestones. From baby showers, birthdays, graduations, and weddings, Isabel Grace is a proud sponsor of the MíraLA Podcast, providing all of our guests their favorite arrangement of flowers. In this episode, I interview Josslyn Glenn, a Latina trans woman who wears many hats in the film industry. Josslyn is an advocate for queer and trans people of color who have been misrepresented and underrepresented in the media. She's wrote a book, and now she's currently writing her second book. Follow @funky.nerd to learn more. Hola, hello everyone. I'm your host, Arianna Lemus, and this is the first episode of the MíraLA Podcast. And my beautiful guest is Miss Josslyn Glenn. Hi, Josslyn. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. It's honestly such an honor to open the show with you. As you know, MíraLA is my legacy. It's truly something that I'm trying to build for all women. And this conversation is going to be a very powerful one. And before we get started into your story and your truth, I have to give a shout out to our sponsor here. So your favorite flowers is lilies and pink roses. Mm-hmm. Can you tell me what is the connection that you have with these beautiful flowers?
Right. I think, the color really stands out. The texture is also something that is, something that, when I was 7 years old, I only saw it one time and it really stood out to me because I'm from Whittier, California, and we don't have them there. So seeing it for the first time and getting outside my bubble it was kind of like that first touch with a world beyond my little bubble. And I also met this little girl when I was in kindergarten. She was new in the middle of the school year and her name was Lily. And I'm like, that is the prettiest name I've ever heard. I'm like, if I ever have a daughter, I would love to name her Lily. So I think it was just both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So much of the reason why I wanted to have a sponsor to give my guests flowers to, because, it's in the logo, yes. But also when Brenda, my producer, came up with the logo, the two flowers represent myself and my guest. And then we have the mic to share our voices. And with the flowers, not only am I wanting to use this platform to give women their flowers, but I also want to physically give my guests their flowers. Because I think it's so important that whether you receive flowers or you even buy yourself flowers, that, to be a woman and to have that connection to flowers, because they're so beautiful and they make you feel beautiful. So it's just a beautiful reminder.
Definitely. And there's so much in a flower. They're layered. And they come out when they're ready. I mean, I love plants and flowers, and speaking them is like speaking something into existence because they hear you and they bloom in your direction. And sometimes maybe they're a little shy, but I mean, with great attention and care, they are beauty manifested.
So here we are. First episode of the MíraLA Podcast. We have a lot of things in common. We're both in the entertainment industry. Tell me about your journey getting into the industry.
I started technically, I'm going to say when I was a kid, which is true and also not true. Like I never started officially, but like I grew up watching like comedy, like In Living Color. And we had like Adam Sandler tapes from when he was on SNL. On VHS, there was just so much exposure to comedy. We grew up with a lot of like 70s comedies, like Three's Company and The Jeffersons and Sanford and Son and all of that. So we watched a lot. And so like my siblings, I have so many siblings. I have 6. And
wow.
Yeah, the last 4 of us, we actually we would do sketch comedy together. So we would write scripts, and I completely forgot about that until like I accidentally wrote a book. Who does that? But
you.
Yes. So yes, I did do that. And I needed to request some, or I need to go find some stories that I had written when I was younger to finish this book. And so I went into the storage unit and I found all these scripts. And at that point, I think it was like 20. And I forgot that I had written scripts. And I'm like, wait, I've been meaning to do this. And it was actually at that venture point when I was 18 to 20, where I was in college, obviously. And, I was at UCLA and I stumbled upon the head of the graduate film department.
You just falling into things,
I guess
accidentally
so.
writing books.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I think I got very, very lucky. And so she said like, yeah, if you're interested in this, you could come onto our master's students' thesis films. I said, oh yeah, no, definitely. So I reached out to her immediately and I said, if you remember me, and I'm getting to a point now where I'm like less apologetic in my language.
Love
But
that. Me too.
yes,
Me too.
It is a work in progress. And so she's like, yeah, of course I remember you. And so she invited me onto those productions. I don't remember how many there were, but one of those, there was another trans individual on some of those productions. And I had met him actually when I had just gotten into UCLA. So when I was still in high school / I did high school and community college at the same time.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. So when I was in that space and I just gotten to UCLA and I was like visiting the campus for the first time, I stumbled onto this person who's also trans. And they were like talking to queer and trans, people coming to UCLA. And he was on these film productions, getting his master's, and he told me, and like we gave a knowing nod to each other. Like we're not going to out each other, but we know.
Right.
And so, he said like, oh, there's this film that's, it's a documentary. It may go nowhere. And, like, are you interested? And I said, oh yeah. At that point I'm like, I will take anything. And it ended up being a production fellowship on this documentary called Disclosure, which,
I feel like I've heard of it.
It's on Netflix.
Okay.
It ended up on Netflix.
Nice.
And I got very lucky. Actually,
what year was this?
This was, I think, 2019.
Okay.
Yes. And so actually, I went to Sundance, I went to Tribeca. COVID happened and then they got a deal with Netflix. And on that production fellowship, there were so many big names like Lorraine Giselle, who has become a friend of mine. And she was on The Shy, which is on Showtime. And then Nava Mao, who is on Baby Reindeer. She was a production fellow as well.
Wow.
And she just got nominated for an Emmy.
I saw that. I have yet to see the show, but you're my reminder that I need to watch it.
Oh my goodness. We'll get ready to like have nightmares.
Okay. Oh, thanks for the heads up.
Yes. And cry. And just take a break. That's, I would advise people, like, they don't give content warnings, I don't think.
Oh, okay.
So just
I haven't heard any of that. So thank you.
Yeah. Journal, whatever you need to do, because it is a doozy to watch. And to like Richard Gadd, the creator, I think he just needed to process trauma that happened to him. And sometimes I think the best thing to do is to turn pain into power.
Right.
And to not let it, overcome you. And the way that I think the way systems often do. And he didn't let it defeat him. And there's a reason why it's an Emmy-nominated show right now.
You brought up turning your pain into power. Can you talk to me about how you've done that in your life journey?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. So
you can take a second. I know that's a loaded question.
It really is. I would say
this is a safe space too.
Yeah, no,
I need a second.
Thank you for that. I would say I turn it into some of the best writing I've ever had. Especially right now, I'm writing my second book. And unlike my first book, this one is actually very, very intentional. And
not accidental.
Not accidental at all. And oh my goodness, it's turning some of my pain and processing it in a way for other people to understand, people in the trans community and people outside the trans community, and not making it digestible for them, but also making it, them human, and also kind of fictionalizing it. Some of these stories are also other people's tragedies or traumas, people that I've interviewed over the years, because like you, I've interviewed a lot of people, and actually just getting into, okay, well, how do I protect the guilty, and how do I turn their pain into, how do I melt it and put it on this flat sheet of paper and be detailed about it in a way that isn't exploitative, in a way that so many people outside this industry do to our stories. Yeah. And especially doing that for myself, because generally people who write our stories are not from our community. That is very evident in just all of entertainment and all of literature. And there's so many people who have profited off of our stories, whether it is the true story or not, or they've erased us. And so for me, I turn it into power by writing myself into the narrative and not erasing myself, not erasing those in our community, and keeping them in mind when I'm writing it. So
it's so much bigger than you.
It really is. Yes. I love to talk to some of the people that I've interviewed and saying like, is this too much? Should I dial back? And my best friend, she is my favorite author. She's written 5 books like it's nothing.
Wow.
She is truly an inspiration, but she has taught me to show and not tell. And as a journalist and somebody from like a math background, it's just so logistical, so rational. For math, it's one solution. For journalism, it's just fact. And so there's not a lot of room for too much creativity. And so for these stories, I'm actually allowing my brain to stretch and show with more detail and use less passive voice and more active voice, and paint a picture, paint a mosaic with words. And how many people can do that? How many people, I like to think that words are free, but they're also freeing. And, like you can just pick up a pen or a paper, or like language it's just so abstract and constructed that we can mold it into anything that we really want, whether it's, like the word Latine, right? Reclaiming language for the trans community and the queer community and the Black community. It's all the same thing.
If you can just educate me a little bit, I'm familiar with Latinx. Now I'm hearing the term Latine. Latine.
Yes.
Okay.
And it's actually, for a lot of people, there's so much complaints about the X, and I've used it before, of course, and I try to be as inclusive as possible. I think it becomes difficult for people who are native Spanish speakers to emphasize the X sound.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
Got it.
So a lot of people, oh my goodness, I see a lot of discourse about this where people are like, oh, you're not really Latino, or they emphasize the O if you say X or whatever. And I think, okay, well, there's going to be pushback with anything new. That's understandable. But Latine, it rolls off the tongue more. And it is like the X, very much so rooted in indigeneity and gender universality, I like to think. So, and gender expansion. So anybody of any identity, it could, like we use there, in English to mean like it could be singular or plural. And there's some people who are like, anybody that uses, there for the singular, well, they're wrong or something. And I'm like, well, you just used there in the singular. So it's kind of like that, Latine, like if you don't want to assume, especially like, for example, there's this population in Mexico called the Muxe, I think Muxe, the Muxe, or I think that's how it's pronounced. I did, at Outfest, I programmed this film called Finlandia, which highlights this community. It's funny enough, it's a narrative fiction film, but it includes actual people from the Muxe community in the movie who are acting, who've never acted before, and they are brilliant. And I wish movies like this would get Emmy nominated, because with no experience, they really depicted the depth so well of their community, and even other parts of the world. They have this gender expansion, and it's generally very accepted.
Welcome to the Walk House, a thriving mental health and wellness center nestled in the heart of Valley Glen, California. We provide culturally sensitive therapy, energy healing, and workshops tailored to the unique needs of teens and women of color. The Walk House is also a perfect rental location for your next event, workshop, wellness retreat. It features 3 offices, 2 bathrooms, a cozy living room, library, and kitchen. And our private yoga studio is fully equipped with blankets, yoga mats, everything you need to have an amazing wellness experience. We're excited to welcome you to the Walk House.
Going to the communities of trans or queer, or maybe just identifying as a person who, is gay or lesbian, do you believe in the industry that it's doing a disservice by hiring actors who don't come from those communities? What are your thoughts there?
That's a great question.
Do you think it's case by case depending on the person, or do you think it's really just a matter of, if this is a story about a queer person or a trans person, it should only be played by a queer person or a trans person? Are you black and white like that, or is there a little bit of gray area?
There's some gray area, but generally, if you're perfect for the role, I can see it from a producing perspective, because I'm in those auditions, that you can't assume, again, going back to your conversation about language, you can't assume somebody's identity, but you can visually and like auditorily hear if they're, in terms of expression too, if they are the best for the part.
Right.
So, Angelica Ross, for example, she's been in several Ryan Murphy shows, and in one season of American Horror Story, I think American Horror Story 1984, her character wasn't confirmed to be trans. I think it was just assumed for her to be cis. It was not a topic of conversation. I worked on a movie with Case Pena, where she did her feature film called Trans Los Angeles, and she's currently funding the last segment. It's an anthology. So there are 4 different stories that center a trans person, all centralized in LA. And one of them that we shot at the end of last year, it centers, just Trans Day of Remembrance, which is an important holiday to commemorate those who have been lost within the year, our transcestors, as we like to say, who have been, who have left this earth too soon.
Right.
And so, but we have a trans actress, which is great, a through line for all of the stories in this film. But her love interest is played by a trans man who's on Pretty Little Liars, the one that's currently out on HBO Max or just Max. His name is Jordan Gonzalez, and he plays a cis guy. And that's not a topic of conversation in the movie at all. So there is room for, this gray area, especially for the gay community too. I think it's actually when, there's a cis person that gets nominated for presenting a trans storyline that really rubs me the wrong way, because this has been happening since Chris Sarandon in the 1970s for Dog Day Afternoon, and then Eddie Redmayne, and Jared Leto, and all these people who largely cis men who can take off the costume. For them it's a costume, they're playing a character that is trans. But in society, as trans people, we don't get to take that off. It is our true identity. And I think the way I like to explain it to people is that, we all have body dysmorphia to a certain degree. Like for some people, they may want a nose job, and they don't feel fully whole their self until they get, a different nose, or, a man that becomes a gym rat and he never fully feels like, I've dated a few guys, I'm sure a lot of people have, where he doesn't feel like fully masculine, fully in his male energy, if he's not at a certain physique. And that will always be his journey, where he's never going to feel enough of a man, enough of a provider, enough of fit enough.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing for trans people, where, there is just so much dysphoria, and we feel it's almost like trauma that it's being inflicted on us without our consent. And so just to get back into the conversation about these roles, I mean, if you can fully embody this character and it comes from a place of, compassion and empathy, and you do your due diligence, and maybe you're not a part of that community, then I think it's worth a shot. But also keep in mind, are you taking a role from somebody else? And is the production, doing its due diligence? Like, does the director, does the producer or the producers, do they have a reputation of having those people behind the scenes to call out authenticity points?
Thank you for sharing all that. You can definitely hear your passion. And like I'm very much in a position. I started as an actress, and I, was just for 10 years, just getting roles that just didn't really identify with me, like even the names that I was auditioning for, it just I should be auditioning for Marisol or Anna or it's just and that's why I became a producer. And that's why I started MíraLA and being women focused and promoting people of color storylines, because it's so important. We need to see that transparency, especially living here in Los Angeles. I did want to ask you, what is your hope for trans women, not only in media, but in real life?
Ooh, I hope that's a great question. I hope, well, first of all, that we have access to just as many resources as that of a cis white straight man who has access to anything in any body, really, truly, any person's body. They're legislating against our bodies. That's a whole other thing. I don't generally talk about politics, but some things become very political. Yeah. So I will throw that nugget in there. But just access to resources, access to opportunities. And for example, it was just a huge privilege to work on Disclosure, because I was coming from a trans man to give the opportunity for, to us when we didn't have that. Yeah. And the entire production, with the exception of a handful of people, were trans. That never happens.
That's very unheard of. Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess we just hope to see more of that, right? On different, like you said, the production designer, whatever the story is, should come from that community, or just have more education. That to me was oh yes. I didn't even think about that, but it's so true. Whatever is going to drive the story, it's the people behind it that are going to make sure that story comes to life, and that story has so much authenticity.
Agreed.
I sit here before you, and you are just such a powerhouse of a woman. You are truly an advocate and an activist, and I see that. I don't know if you're familiar with the term being a giant versus a grasshopper, but I just want to let you know, the strides that you are making, the conversations that you're having, and how you're putting yourself out there in the industry and making it known what needs to change is huge. So what you're doing is big stuff, is giant things, and you're being loud about it in a very beautiful, conservative way. And the way you dress, you just present this elegance energy. And I think continue that, I affirm everything that you're saying, because it's really amazing. I can only imagine what you've accomplished now and who you're going to become.
As I mentioned in the pre-interview, that this entire between Monday and Friday of this week, I'm just going to do it no Wi-Fi,
right?
Unplug. I'm going to watch really bad novelas and cook and write and read smut.
You're prioritizing yourself, because it seems like you do so much for other people and for the community that it's you have to schedule in that time for yourself. I think even you just telling, and sharing with the listeners that I'm going to unplug and I'm not going to be on Wi-Fi, that is so refreshing to hear. And I don't think we hear it enough. And for someone with your resume and your caliber of success, the fact that you take that ownership of your own mental health, because that if I don't do this, I can't show up for the people that I want to show up for. I can't show up as my higher self, my positive self, because positivity is fucking hard. It's easy to be negative. It's easy to look at the things that are going wrong in your life. It is hard to show up every day, put a fucking smile on your face, and love yourself and accept yourself for who you are and the shit that you've gone through, right? So thank you for saying that, because I think women need to hear that. People need to hear that. People of color need to hear that. Take a fucking break. You deserve it. You work your ass off. You do this for this person. You do this for your family. It's like, do something for yourself. And sometimes doing nothing for yourself and watching bad novellas is the best thing you could do.
It's productive.
Right.
It's all about that accountability, that healing, that growth, that pushing past, surpassing people's expectations, including their own, of what they're capable of. And I have done that in so many ways in my own life. And I look forward to seeing how, just last tidbit, like we're all on this hill in our lives, and we will never see the top of the hill. But, we all started somewhere, and we plant seeds every day of our lives. And we can look down on that hill, which is scary, but it's a great reflection of where we are at right now. And we can see that some of the trees they were just a bud, and they never really went anywhere. Some of them are like yay big. Some of them are this big. Some of them are hollowed out, Some of them never really had the chance to be a big stump or anything. Some of them have been cut down, whatever the case. But there's a version of us that's like 7 years old that's looking up at where we are right now, up on that hill. They never thought possible for us. And there's a version of us that's there 10, 20 years higher on that hill. And we are just like a tiny ant in comparison. How are we going to set her up for success? Yes. How are we going to make her, feel proud of the decisions that got her there, and there's this, thread between every version of ourselves. And, it can feel like a different version of you, but it's also a more grown, more healed version of you if you just allow yourself to get there.
Silence, because that is so powerful. Everything you just said. Thank you, Josslyn, for being on the MíraLA podcast, being the first guest, being here, a proud trans woman. And thank you for giving others opportunities and for leaving your legacy through the people that come into your life. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Gracias por entrevistarme. Es un gran placer conversar contigo. And I look forward to just seeing and hearing the rest of the MíraLA podcast. And I look forward to seeing all the sponsorships that you get too.
Yes.
More to come.
Gracias, amiga.
Yes.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the MíraLA podcast. If you are a woman and would like to be on the show, go to MíraLaPodcast.com. Follow us on socials at MíraLA Podcast. Use hashtag MíraLA Mondays. And if you want to support the show, subscribe, share with your amigos, and tune in for new episodes every Monday. Muchas gracias.